Okay, last section of fungi, hopefully not as long as the previous one. This is phylum Basidiomycota. It's our third phylum, fourth phylum. Yes, fourth phylum we're talking about. These are commonly called club fungi, not because they're social and like to hang out in clubs, but because their reproductive structure, again, has a club shape, like something you beat people with, right? They produce basidiospores. In a basidium, that word will be up here in a little bit, that is the name for the club-like structure, basidium. In this group, we have mini mushrooms, bracket fungi, puffballs, and stinkhorns. Some lovely sounding names there. Here we go. Above structures are fruiting bodies containing club-shaped basidia. That's your plural. Basidium, singular. Again, I will not care if you use the proper singular plural in a sentence or in your table, as long as you have one of the two. Again, we'll not talk to you or ask you to talk to me on the test about sexual reproduction. Method, type, that it's spores and that it's basidiospores produced in a basidium. That's what I want you to know about the sexual reproduction method. Because again, at the end, we're going to talk about the asexual, and it's different. Okay, picture here, I do not know what that is. This is I've seen that in the name, but I don't remember. This is a puffball. And these are shelf fungi or bracket fungi, sometimes referred to as bracket fungi. You can find these growing on dead logs, and you can actually see them down on the creek on campus. There's quite a few of them on dead tree stumps that they went down and cut out trees a few years back to thin out some of the trees on the creek, and there's quite a few of these on the dead stumps. So fruiting bodies, that's another name for the structures that produce the reproductive parts, whatever those are going to be, in this case spores. Uh, these are tightly packed hyphae forming this club-shaped thing. Okay, and so basidia, basidium. Beyond that, you don't need to worry about anything on this slide. And so that's moving on from there. So go back and review real quick what we have. We have Basidiomycota is your phylum name, first column. Basidiospores are produced in a basidium, and they have both sexual and asexual reproduction methods. This is the sexual reproduction method here, the basidia producing basidiospores. Your mushrooms that you eat, standard, what we think of as mushrooms, the little button mushrooms, the portobello mushrooms, they belong to this phylum. The last phylum is Deuteromycota. These are referred to as imperfect fungi simply because we cannot find that they do a sexual reproduction process. And I've mentioned before that scientists kind of view, well, geneticists at least, which it's my training, view anything that doesn't reproduce sexually as at a disadvantage because the result is going to be a clone of the parent and therefore not have the ability to get some sexual or genetic diversity from sexual recombination going on in the offspring. So that makes the population, the resulting population of clones, very susceptible to some type of environmental change or disease that comes in. So we have kind of a viewpoint that really limits the ability of the organism to survive. And so therefore the idea of it's imperfect. Now we're not going to say that a sexual stage doesn't exist because I think, and I'm not a mycologist. A mycologist is a person who studies fungi, mycology, the study of fungi. So you get myco, and you see that in all these phylum names, mycota, that means fungus. So mycologists, I'm not a mycologist, so I'm not an expert in this area by any means, but worked a little bit in mycology for a little while in college. Worked for a mycologist, so I know enough to be dangerous, probably, right? Uh, the genetic diversity in this grouping, I believe, is there. And so the question is, well, if they're not doing sexual reproduction, where's it coming from? And so they're hesitant to say that it doesn't reproduce sexually, but we haven't caught them in the act, so we can't say. So what they do for this asexual reproduction that we know about is, oh, that's going to be a future slide, I guess. Let me double check that. No, it's not. There it is. Yes. Okay. Back to where I was. I just got ahead of myself. So um, they produce kinidiospores in a conidium. And that is exactly what all of the phylum above in your table do for asexual reproduction as well, except Chytridium mycota. Remember our very first one, it does zygospores for both. It's just the zygospores are going to be either haploid or diploid. Okay, so uh, here in the next 4 phyla after the first one, they have sexual reproduction method different from the asexual reproduction method, and it's this kinidiospores in the conidium, and of course this last one just has this one that we know of. So species that are of direct use to humans in this category, penicillium. This was the original source of antibiotic penicillin, is that fungus. Penicillium is its genus name. Other species give us flavors for our Roquefort and Camembert cheese, and the blue streaks actually in blue cheese are actually eating the kinidiospores themselves, the little reproductive spores. Cyclosporine, which is used to suppress the immune system following organ transplants, is derived from a soil fungus that is in this category of Deuteromycota. So some pretty useful ones there. Of course, if you don't like any of these cheeses, you may be going, yeah, no. But if you do, I think blue cheese is kind of an acquired taste. Um, but if, and sometimes I'm in the mood for it, usually I'm not. But again, this in particular, very useful. People enjoy that, find it useful. And of course, if you have to ever have an organ transplant, and there are some other reasons where you might need to suppress the immune system briefly, this is a very important drug for that. Here's our Petri dish again. I've talked about this. We had E. coli, a picture of E. coli on it last time. This is our Staphylococcus aureus, which we've talked about with our bacteria. This is the penicillium mold actually growing on it. And what you see here is this was a streak. They took the swab and they streaked. I know I've talked to you about that also before. They streaked it on the plate. This should have grown right across here underneath this penicillium. There should be this nice little lawn. That's what that's kind of referred to as, these streaks, actually. Whoa, okay. Should be opaque like that and not clear. So that means that this mold is exuding something out into the agar medium that uh, is killing the Staphylococcus aureus and not preventing it to live. And so that's its antibiotic quality. So that's what was extracted and used for penicillin. There's some of the cheese. So those are the beneficial ones. Here's the disease-causing examples of this group. We have some respiratory infections from inhaling the spores that people can get. Ringworm, which sounds like it's some little animal parasite, a worm, and one of the worm, like Annelida or Platyhelminthes or something categories we'll talk about later, but it's not. It's a fungus. It just causes this uh, growth that's in a ring on your skin. So people called it ringworm early and the name stuck. Athlete's foot, also in this category. And the yeast Candida albicans. This is a really nasty little thing here. It can be pretty mild, so to speak. In some cases, it can cause thrush, and that's usually very treatable. It's a outbreak of the yeast in the mouth, um, usually in infants. Okay, more common in infants. It can't occur in anybody. Vaginal infections in females on the birth control pill. Why is that brought out there? And I feel like I kind of need to elaborate on that in occasion. The birth control pill, at least some versions of the birth control pill that I'm familiar with, um, actually suppress the immune system as a kind of a indirect effect. One of the things that they do is they contain hormones that tell your body that you're pregnant. And then naturally, the body does some things, takes over and does some things. It tells your body to suppress the immune system so that you don't attack the fetus and destroy it. Um, and so your body is constantly in a battle with yeast. Our Some of that good bacteria that I talk about all the time is fighting off and eating that yeast, and there's kind of this little war going on back and forth between them. And your immune system is also functioning in that. And if you suppress one of those factors, the yeast can get an upper hand and take over. Okay, so um, that's kind of what's going on there in a simplified nutshell. Um, but the pill actually somewhat simulates pregnancy because that's how it works. It prevents the body from ovulating, and you naturally don't ovulate. You don't release an egg when you're pregnant. So other factors happen. It's like if you notice you gained weight, if you're female and you took the birth control pill and you gained weight afterward, that's part of it because you suddenly get kind of hungry, and it's body signals saying, hey, you need to eat because you're going to have to feed too. And so those are some of the side effects of the birth control pill. Fungal relationships. Lichens is our first one we're going to talk about. This is a symbiotic relationship between fungus and a cyanobacteria, or a fungus and a green algae. Now, if you notice, it's always a fungus and then either a cyanobacteria or a green algae to make a lichen. The cyanobacteria and the green algae can't team up. It has to be a fungus as one of the partners in the relationship. So this is because the fungi does not photosynthesize. So it partners with a photosynthesizer such as cyanobacteria or the green algae. And so that means it's identified according to the fungal partner. That's how it's categorized. So what happens is the fungus forms a thin, protective, tough upper layer and a loose lower layer. It traps moisture, keeps water in there for it. The algae or cyanobacteria are shielded there and protected from drying out in this middle layers, so they can live outside of a pond or creek or river or stream, lake, okay, wherever they would normally have to live in the water. They can live out on land where the fungus can live on land. They can live on bare rocks, which they usually do. And they're usually assumed, previously it was unquestioned really much, that they um, both benefited. The algae photosynthesizes and provides food, or the cyanobacteria, okay, photosynthesizes and provides food, and then the fungus takes care of them, protects them from drying out, and gets the benefit of some of the food too. So it's referred to as mutualism. However, uh, some scientists have contested that and said that the algae, if it were still back in the pond and not having to feed too with its photosynthesis, would reproduce and grow much faster and better and healthier. And that is a viewpoint. But if you look at the fact that there may not be room for any more algae in that pond that's already there, and this algae can grow out on the land without having to compete, in a sense, for nutrients. It's right there. Uh, Fungus does break down organic matter for uh, food and nutrients. Okay, so some of that can benefit the algae for the nutrients that it needs, such as like phosphorus, potassium, those things. So yeah, that's where I've mentioned before when you talk about like commensalism is very debatable. Usually there's some scientists that say there is no such thing. It's either mutualistic or it's parasitic, one or the other. And we're just not seeing the whole picture if we think one's benefiting the other and it's not being affected. Well, here's a debate whether about is it actually mutualism, or is it a very, 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 very mild parasitism going on here? Okay. And that is a picture of some different type of lichens growing on bare rock. That's the gray back here is a bare rock. These are your lichens, scaly things. You've seen these probably if you've gone down around a creek, walked around. Sometimes they grow on dead trees as well. Sometimes they grow on living trees. So um, yeah, okay, I just really kind of talked about that front part there. Lichens can survive some pretty harsh conditions. Um, Obviously, living on bare rock is not, you know, what we think of as easy. So because they have that ability, they're called pioneer species, and I'll probably talk more about pioneer species later in the plant kingdom. But what they do is when they exude out chemicals to break down things in their environment outside themselves, I'm talking about the fungi partner here, that also works to break down some of the rock minerals. Some of those chemicals will, slowly act on the rock too. Uh, and so they slowly start the process of turning rock into soil. That's where soil comes from. It's a combination of broken down rock minerals and built up organic matter over time. And some of these lichens actually get large enough that they appear to be moss-like, and they can be an important source of food for animals. An example here is the Arctic reindeer moss. Others are used as indication of pollution. I've had, actually it wasn't one of my students, it was another teacher's student for science fair, did a project on the creek there on campus looking at pollution um, after high flood times where the creek got out of the banks. What was the effect of that water coming in contact with lichens growing on the um, tree trunks of the trees around the edge of the creek? And it was a very interesting um, experiment project that the student did. And so again, some lichens are more tolerant of pollution than others. So you could look at the diversity and which ones were growing there, and the ones that were growing there were more tolerant and that sort of thing. And it's been a long time. I don't remember all the details of her study, but that was the first example I actually saw of this being done. And then I've read about it since a little bit. So that is I found a common technique used in ecology, where they're doing studies, ecological studies of an area, trying to determine all the factors that are affecting life in that area. So here are three varieties of lichens. So all lichens are categorized into one of these three groups. We have crustose, which is what I showed you in that first picture. Foliose, these lichens are called leaf-like. They can be found on tree bark and on human structures, and these definitely look fuzzy, okay, very mossy, small moss, okay. Then we have fruticose, and these are considered even shrub-like. I don't know that I've ever seen any of these in real life, or hanging moss-like on trees. And though you find them growing on trees or hanging on them, they're usually not parasitic. Mycorrhizae, this term means fungus roots. They form a symbiotic relationship between the soil fungi and the roots of the plant, or this is a symbiotic relationship between the soil fungi and the roots of the plant. The fungus is going to provide the plants with inorganic nutrients, again, exuding chemicals onto the soil and extracting out organic matter. It's going to also get some, be able to take in some inorganic nutrients that the plant wouldn't otherwise be able to access, and then make those available to the plant. And then the plant provides fungus with organic nutrients, basically your glucose. Okay. This is very beneficial for plants growing in soils that don't have enough phosphates. Okay, phosphorus can't be used by the plant directly, so it has to be changed to a phosphorus that's bound to oxygens. So if you go back to our chemistry chapter again, phosphate is a phosphorus with 4 oxygens attached to it. So those oxygens have to be put on to that mineral phosphorus, and the fungus can extract that and do that. The fungus can enter the cortex of the roots, but it doesn't actually enter into the plant cells and doesn't harm the plant. Okay, it doesn't harm the roots, doesn't cause disease to the roots or anything along those lines. Okay, so that wraps up the fungal kingdom.